Thanks for joining tonight, everyone. Now we've got about 17 people coming. So I'd love to know if you know much about imposter syndrome and if you have any questions you might like answered during tonight's masterclass. If you wanted to pop anything in the chat, then please do so. Hi, Mary, welcome. Everyone's flooding in, that's great. Hi, Deb. Great to have you here.
Hi.
Now, hopefully you all have had a great day. It's been a bit of a disjointed week, given that it's been Cup Week here in Melbourne. It kind of feels like Monday to me. I had to remind myself that it was Wednesday and it was our time to meet. So we might make a start. Now, I apologise in advance if my children wander in partway through the presentation. They're just going off to bed, so hopefully we'll be undisturbed. So again, thank you for joining me. Welcome to my masterclass on the lowdown on imposter syndrome. Today, we're going to look at what imposter syndrome is and isn't. And I'm going to make sure that everyone has a common understanding, because a lot of people get confused between imposter syndrome and self-doubt. And it does matter, but it doesn't matter. And I'll explain that in more detail lately. And we'll also talk about how it shows up and what you can do about it. And we've still got a couple of people joining us. Okay, so it's just a recap. So tonight we're going to go through what imposter syndrome is and isn't, where it comes from. I'm going to share with you the imposter syndrome iceberg and why it's important, how imposter syndrome shows up, and some of this might resonate with you, you may recognize it, why understanding and debunking common imposter syndrome is so important, and how to press pause on imposter syndrome fast. And really at the end of the day, I want you to take away that tip on how to manage it effectively so that you can pass through those moments where you're feeling imposter syndrome. So before we start, imposter syndrome is often misunderstood. So let's clarify a few things. It's not actually a syndrome in a medical sense. So it can't be diagnosed by a medical doctor, so a psychologist or a counsellor. And it was originally named imposter syndrome phenomenon by Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes back in 1978. But the media actually, sorry, interrupted by children, the media actually incorrectly reported that it only affected women, but that actually isn't the case. And I'll share with you why that's not the case. And it's also not a souped up version of self-doubt. And I'll explain why that's important. So a common definition, or a current or modern definition of imposter syndrome is it's the secret fear of being found out as not good enough or a fraud, despite ample evidence of our success and achievements. So it's our outside worldview versus our internal self-talk. And this is where our inner critic comes into play. It's the kind of thoughts that keep us awake at 3 a.m. It's what we tell ourselves. So in 85, Joanne Harvey and Cynthia Katz relabeled it imposter syndrome phenomenon. And they described it as a psychological pattern rooted in intense concealed feelings of fraudulence when faced with achievement tasks. And if you were to go to the English dictionary, it would say the feeling that your achievements are not real or that you don't deserve praise or success. And if you've ever read Sheryl Sandberg's book, The CEO of Facebook, she describes it as capable people being plagued by self-doubt. So I wonder if any of those hits home for you and has you feeling like, oh, yes, maybe that's me. Another way to think of it, though, is it's the secret fear of others judging us as harshly as we judge ourselves. And we all know we're our own worst critic. And sometimes we speak to ourselves and think about ourselves in a way that we would never allow ourselves to behave towards someone else. And I think it's important to understand that this means that we expend a huge amount of energy judging ourselves and being scared that others are judging us in that same way. And that keeps ourselves safe from being judged because we hold back. Now, imposter syndrome runs far deeper than self-doubt. Imposter syndrome is actually the gap between who we believe we are and who we believe we need to be in order to achieve our goals and dreams. So what we do is we build a bridge of coping strategies, and sometimes they work when that bridge is stable. And sometimes that gap widens though, and we recruit any number of coping strategies that we can possibly come up with. But they occur when our identity is challenged. And when that gap opens up, the tools that we've been using and relying on to get us through, they can fail when we need them most because they aren't up to the job. And that can happen, for instance, when we have a new job or a promotion. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail. And our aim here, though, is to work on making those coping strategies unnecessary, not perfect, and improve them. So this is the imposter syndrome iceberg, and you'll see there that actions and self-talk are above the waterline there, and that's the realm of self-doubt. So self-doubt is about what we can and can't do, whereas imposter syndrome is way below the surface, below beliefs, below values. It's at the crux, it's about our self-identity. It's who am I to? So imposter syndrome is about our sense of identity, and it's not just about our skills and our knowledge. So how do we spot imposter syndrome? And these are some questions you can ask yourself based on this language. So if you ever hear talk about or self-talk about what I can and I can't do, that's an indication of self-doubt. So that's about our skills, our knowledge, our capabilities, and our experiences. So things like, I can't do X, Y, and Z. I don't have enough experience. I don't know as much as I should or need to. And the talk that links to our self-identity relates to that imposter syndrome. And that's things like, who am I to? So who am I to do this? What if they find out I'm faking it? What if they find me out? What if they realize I'm not good enough or a fraud? And a landmark international research study that was undertaken by a leading academic in 2019 highlighted that there are two types of self-doubt. And that study proved that difference between self-doubt and imposter syndrome. Now, if we're using the wrong tools for the job, we can make things far worse. So if we're relying on classic coaching techniques and self-doubt tools, they won't work at that deeper identity level crisis, which is where imposter syndrome resides. But if we're running imposter syndrome and we're looking to those classic coaching and mindset techniques, they're not going to be effective. And interesting, some mindset techniques, things like affirmations, I am powerful, I am amazing. It's really interesting because they simply will not work when we don't believe that they're true. So our unconscious mind will not allow us to achieve something that we don't believe is possible for us. And that's one of the reasons why some of those techniques are just not worthwhile and not beneficial at this level. So at best, they might provide a temporary band-aid, but at worst, they will make the situation far worse and more acute because they just don't go deep enough. So with self-doubt, specific skills training and or mentoring can be enough to boost confidence and reduce self-doubt. But improving our skills won't necessarily clear our out-of-date imposter syndrome habits. So why it doesn't matter. The good news is that what you'll learn today will help with both imposter syndrome and self-doubt, but it is important to know the difference because we can have self-doubt without imposter syndrome, but we can't have imposter syndrome without self-doubt. So we always tackle them both. Now, this is an interesting one. So who experiences imposter syndrome? Would it surprise you to learn, would it surprise you to learn that 60% of men and 62% of women suffer from imposter syndrome either daily or regularly in the past year? And the higher a person's ambient stress level, the more likely they are to experience imposter syndrome severely. And interestingly, those statistics have gone up significantly over lockdown, because as we shut down, we go further into ourselves. So women tend to hold back more emotional responses. They're more scared of speaking out and being judged and holding back from being visible, which is a feminine conditioning. But that's outside of our scope today. Whereas men tend to push through and they keep a stiff upper lip, even though they report imposter syndrome as being crippling. Now, 5%, they're 5% more likely to turn to drugs, to alcoholism or medication to deal with the stress as a result. Whereas women are 20% more likely to share their feelings and experiences with someone else. Unfortunately, all that does is actually help build a sturdier bridge of coping strategies. It doesn't actually help clear the imposter syndrome. So I'm interested to understand if you're surprised at those rates. So feel free to leave any comments in the chat. Interestingly, women also tend to be disadvantaged by imposter syndrome to a higher degree, due to the perception of imposter syndrome being a women's problem, which links back to the popular media coverage of that, the initial research back in the 70s. And their tendency to share their feelings creates more bias towards them, because it makes them more visible, whereas men are much more likely to shut down and keep silent and bottle things up. Andy, you thought it'd be more women than men. Yeah, absolutely. And that's because, you know, the statistics prove that women are more likely to speak up, but actually it doesn't help, unfortunately. So people experience imposter syndrome differently. Now, 52% struggle with perfectionism, 70% struggle with procrastination, 53 with project paralysis, and 68 with people pleasing. Now, imposter syndrome is really sneaky. It can show up occasionally or regularly. It can be fleeting or persistent. It can be passing or super intense, and it can affect more than one area of our life or career. You could find that you have everything sorted in all aspects of your life. However, you're going for a promotion at work and all of a sudden you're flooded by crippling imposter syndrome feelings. And it's not uncommon to have that sort of scenario. It's also can be more present, more regularly, with less intensity for some people. And, you know, we'll each use different coping strategies in order to get through the day and our experience. But the major problem with the energy that we expend just being us, by struggling and pushing through and leaning towards the coping strategies. So it just increases our adrenal and our stress response, and it increases our risk of burnout as well. The problem with perfectionism. So perfectionism actually increases as the stakes increase. So, you know, if you're washing the dishes, you know, perfectionism may not bother you very much. If you're about to deliver on a, you know, high stakes project, then perfectionism may cripple you in a way that it would not in other areas of your life. And perfectionism also amplifies where there are others involved. So if we are at risk of being more visible to our partner, our family, colleagues or peers, or even clients, if you're working in an industry where you're dealing with outside clients. So this makes it harder for us to delegate or relinquish any kind of control. So we have a tendency to push and prove and work excessively hard, and we take on too much and end up trying to do everything ourselves. And that is the perfect ingredients for burnout. It also increases our risk of poor outcomes and mistakes. and reinforces that negative sense of self as well. So we know procrastination is not great for us. Why do we do it? Well, it's an evolutionary strategy that we've used to keep us psychologically safe. It basically is a self-protection mechanism. So if we don't start something, can't finish it. And therefore, we're trying to protect ourselves from being vulnerable. We're trying to avoid judgment, and therefore we can't fail. But being vulnerable means we leave ourselves open to proving that we're the fake and the fraud that we judge ourselves to be. So it's an avoidance strategy. And how does it manifest? So people running imposter syndrome are more likely to experience stress-related symptoms of pushing on through despite their fears, which leads to adrenal fatigue, conditioned hypervigilance, increased anxiety, and then as a result, it actually produces the type of performance issues that we acutely worry about. So we risk creating our own worst nightmare, pushing so hard that we make mistakes and we underperform. And our fears become our self-fulfilling prophecy. This is also known as confirmation bias. So we might also avoid the spotlight at all costs. So we might resist putting ourselves out there and completing big tasks. And this can be referred to as project paralysis. So, if we don't start, then we don't put ourselves out there and we're not vulnerable. So we may actively shrink away from opportunities to shine. We avoid successfully achieving our goals. We avoid applying for promotions. We avoid pursuing work or leisure activities that we'd otherwise thrive from being involved in. So one of my clients recently loved community theatre, but she couldn't possibly join the troupe and perform in the end of year show, because she was so worried and plagued with imposter syndrome and doubt that she didn't believe that she was worthy of being in the show and that she didn't have a place there. And who am I to step onto this stage and give a performance and to sing and dance because I don't deserve my place up here? And it was absolutely crippling for her. And that means that she was avoiding something that she actually loved, which means that you were incapable of thriving in our both our professional and personal lives, because we avoid things that we would otherwise enjoy. It also means that we can avoid speaking up and being seen and contributing in a bigger way. So we lose that sense of self-agency, and it means that really intelligent, capable, and worthy people are holding themselves back. And, these things happen even when we know deep down that we're doing a great job and we're more than capable. And suppressing ourselves like this takes up loads and loads of energy. It leaves us feeling tired, stressed, and overwhelmed, and it actually reduces our resilience overall as well. And it makes even little things feel really impossible for us. We also devalue our skills and knowledge and worth. So we simply cannot internalize our special talents, skills, and abilities. We reject praise and recognition. In fact, they can actually fuel our imposter syndrome feelings, which I'll go into a bit more in detail later on. And we can pass off our success as luck, being in the right place at the right time, or the work being a team effort. And that's despite all external evidence of our success. So it doesn't matter what is happening externally that other people can see, we can't internalize that ourselves. So I invite you to consider a new mantra, and that is, I was born worthy, deserving, and enough. So if we think of ourselves as an infant, we didn't think, oh, I can't cry now, I'm not worthy or deserving of my parent coming to me and soothing me, or changing my nappy, of feeding me. We were born worthy, deserving, and enough, and we still are. But somewhere along the way, we lose connection with that. So I invite you to choose to be unapologetically and authentically all of you, and to stop holding back so you can show up in a bigger way. So sometimes it leads to saying yes when we should say no as well. So we might struggle with healthy boundaries, and this is known as people pleasing. So we may take actions to feel acceptable and like we belong. We might shift our priorities to suit others. I don't know if you've ever worked with, and I had one boss in particular that was just renowned for this. Every time we went to a joint meeting, she took on projects and tasks that had nothing to do with our direct area, and it left our whole team exposed and overwhelmed. And instead of us excelling, it put extreme stress on all of the participants in the team and in the project. And, you know, the result was really negative, unfortunately. So taking on those extra tasks and responsibilities that don't belong, over promising and over giving, which is that energy sap again. And we can also fall into that trap of pretending to be someone we're not. So wearing a mask constantly. And we know if we're wearing that mask constantly, we have to put energy into being someone that we're not. And that's exhausting. I think it's really important to know also that healthy boundaries don't actually make us unlikable. In fact, they make us calmer, more grounded, better able to articulate ourselves and to function better in all circumstances. So in actual fact, they enable us to be even more likable by being authentically ourselves. So where does imposter syndrome come from? And this is a fun example, but have you ever been on the road and seen all the red cars? Perhaps you're looking to buy a new car and the one that you like is red. Well, only 10% of the cars on the road are red. But if we were to buy a red car, suddenly we just see them everywhere. It's like someone went out overnight and increased the colour balance of cars on the road. And suddenly we're convinced there are thousands of red cars. They're just everywhere. And who knew they were so common? The part of our brain that's responsible for this is called our reticular activating system, our RAS. And the RAS filters information. So it helps us make sense of billions of bits of information that we experience from outside and inside of our world on a daily basis. But luckily, our unconscious mind normally is oblivious to all of that minutiae because it cannot take on all of the bits of information that it interprets at any one point in time. So our thinking brain only processes about 3 things at a time. And the RAS prioritizes keep me safe information above all. Then it prioritizes information that we've told it is important. And then a key way that it does that is via our habits. So the more we act out on our habits, the more important we're telling our brain that certain actions or behaviours are valued, and the more we will actually do them. So if you think about, for instance, your ears in a plane, you're completely, unaware of how your ears regulate in pressure. But if you get on a plane and you're going up, you may actually feel your ears pop and all of a sudden you become acutely aware of it. So that's your RAS filtering out the critical information until it's relevant to you. The same as, you never feel your blood circulating in your foot until you sit on it and you get pins and needles. Or the weight of a coffee cup, you never think about it until you're raising it for a sip. And I actually broke my little finger playing lacrosse many years ago. And the things that you can't do with one broken little finger that you become acutely conscious of, the steering wheel, holding a shopping bag, picking up a cup of coffee. So luckily our brain filters all of those things because it gives us time to focus and prioritize on the things that are really important to us. But sometimes in the case of imposter syndrome, it also gives us time to focus on the things that we would like to let go of. So if you think about your thoughts as passing clouds and mind stories, if we think thought once, it just passes on through like a fluffy cloud on a blue summer sky. But if we engage that thought and we tell ourselves a story about it, and we attribute meaning to it, then we're practicing it, we're rehearsing it. Now, the thought that thought triggers a chemical reaction in our body, which creates an emotion, which feeds the thought and the emotion and the chemicals, and it becomes a circular argument until we get distracted or decide to move on. So, that moment that you go up in the air and your ears regulate on a plane, and you pass and you just keep moving on, and you no longer need to direct energy or attention to it. And so you can just move on. Now, this is a form of the stress cycle response. So the stress cycle response explains how a single thought can turn into a full-blown mind story drama. So if we have that fear-based thought, I'm not good enough, or who am I to, then we associate meaning to it, and that kicks off our emotional response. That triggers, in turn, a biochemical response in our body, which causes that stress cycle response, and that dictates our actions or behaviours. And that's how emotions actually feed our actions and our responses. It's also how self-sabotage impacts our actions. So if we're conditioned to believe we're not good enough, we practice again and again this stress cycle response. And then any minute reinforcement of that thought, I'm not good enough, kicks off that same emotional response, because we get so used to habitually going through that. And that's how our triggers become habitual, and we get better and better at reinforcing them. So, you know, we might have a trigger and it might take us from 1 to 10, but if we practice that enough, it'll take us from 1 to 100 in a split second, and we get better and faster at producing an acute response to the same sort of stimulus. And that's how our emotions impact our beliefs. So the beliefs are set with this. Beliefs that are set with a strong emotion, our negative beliefs, are far more resistant to change. And so we hold on to them more tightly, and we unconsciously link them to our self-identity. So we actively seek out information to confirm our negative beliefs, and that's called cognitive bias. And it's a bit like that red car scenario. So we're directing our energy and our attention continuously towards confirming over and over again our negative self-identity. And it gets reinforced and stronger and stronger. Now, there are two types of fear that we have. One is a legitimate fear, and the other we've already touched on is a mind story fear. And it's really important to understand that our body feels every thought we think. So legitimate fear was designed, you know, back in the prehistoric ages, when we had that saber-toothed tiger scenario. It was designed to keep us safe. So the blood would be flowing in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, where logical, structured, creative thinking happens. And we're presented with a life-threatening situation, that saber-toothed tiger in front of us, and we will either flight, fright, or freeze. Now, if we fight, it will be over momentarily, and we will either survive or not. If we hopefully it hasn't seen us, we will run and we will live to see another day. And if we freeze, hopefully it will pass on by. But while the blood is directed from the prefrontal cortex to the amygdala at the back of our brain, we are in fight, flight, and freeze mode. And we're literally incapable of thinking rationally and creatively and logically. So I don't know if you've ever been in a meeting where you just couldn't find the words. You were feeling under pressure, spotlight was on you, and you were just incapable of getting your point across or the words out. That's exactly what's happening in your body. So it doesn't matter that, you know, you're not actually at risk of dying or being killed. Your brain interprets that information in exactly the same way. So that explains, I guess, how that single thought can trigger a full-blown mind story drama. And it's important, again, to come back to that point that our brain won't let us make a change that it doesn't believe is possible. So we can't make deep identity level changes without first releasing our limiting beliefs. So imposter syndrome and limiting beliefs. So imposter syndrome is born from limiting beliefs that we develop mostly through childhood between 0 and 7, but it can be beyond that. But before the age of 7, we may have explicitly been told that we're bad or unworthy. Or someone's words or behaviour may have inferred that we're not deserving or good enough. And we may have come to the conclusion that we're not capable or acceptable or lovable as we are. And they're all mind story fears. But the difference is between before the age of 7, we're not capable of understanding differently. So those limiting beliefs are nothing more than those fear-based thoughts that we've attached meaning to, i.e. I'm not good enough. And that we've practiced repeatedly until they've become an unconscious habit. And the thought of them alone is enough to trigger the stress cycle response in our body. And that's how a single thought becomes that mind story drama. So I invite you to begin viewing your limiting beliefs and even capturing them, writing them down, or any unwanted negative thoughts, and viewing them as a passing cloud in the blue sky and allowing them to float on by. And see how that allows you to just let them flow. If we don't attach meaning to them, any thought that we have will pass on by, usually within 60 seconds. Now, what are your limiting beliefs? I'd be interested to understand that. Do you believe, given what you now know, that you suffer from imposter syndrome or have ever? So I invite you to take a moment to write down any limiting beliefs that you might hold about yourself in relation to worthiness or deserving or being good enough. And I wonder if you recall any particular instances where you took on and internalized those limiting beliefs. And it doesn't matter if you actually have specific examples where you can recognize that. It doesn't negate that regardless, those limiting beliefs do actually feel real to you. So an example for me, when I was about 14, I told my nana, whom I worshipped and adored, that I wanted to grow up and finish high school and go to university. And now my nana said to me, oh, well, if you want to go to university, then I guess we'll support you. But, we're more of a blue collar family. Now, this was a 1950s housewife that had to give up her career the day she got married. So it was just beyond the realm of her possibilities to understand that a young girl could actually have those opportunities available to her. So she wasn't saying that I wasn't deserving or worthy or good enough of them, but that's how I interpreted that. And I think the emotional value of my nana, whom I loved and adored, saying that to me was so profound that I held it really closely for a very long time. It's the same as, if you're walking down the street and someone that you've never met before or clapped eyes on looked you up and down and said, well, you're ugly, you'd probably think, whatever. But if someone that you love looks you up and down and says you're ugly, you're going to have a much more emotive response to that. And when emotion and negative limiting beliefs come together, that's where they leave a really deep imprint on our self-identity. So if you have trouble with the passing clouds idea, and not everyone is visual and can actually see those clouds passing on by in the sky, this is a desensitization game. And I invite you to give your unconscious mind permission to allow this to work. And I ask you to ask that question of yourselves before you do it. So if you have a deep limiting belief that you want to release, but you have trouble with that passing clouds method, here's another process to try. So grab a trusted friend and tell them your limiting beliefs. So I recently had a client who had a limiting belief that was, I am a nothing. And when I asked her to rate that out of 1 to 10, it was literally, it was a 20. It was so triggering and hurtful to her that it was absolutely incapacitating. So we put on a timer for 2 minutes and we took turns stating the limiting belief, and we went back and forward and we used, quick language, harsh language, and, appropriate passion and vigor. And we just kept trading turns and until that timer went off. And by the end of it, this person was actually in tears of laughter because she thought that phrase, I am a nothing, just felt so silly to her. And she recognized them as just words, and it took the charge out of the emotional response to it. And when I asked her to rate how that felt, she said, oh, look, it's a 0. It just feels ridiculous to me. So if you're having if you want to have a bit of a warm up with that, start with another word or a phrase. And I don't know if any of you have kids, but my kids, for instance, have this trigger word of 34, and we can't even remember anymore how it happened, but they think it's hilarious. And so they wrote it on a whiteboard once, I think at a kid's party, and drew pictures around it. And now every time you say the word 34, they burst out laughing. It's ridiculous. So we can anchor anything in that we want, and we can anchor happy emotions as well as negative emotions. So if you start with another word or a phrase and play this game, if you like, and you can make it something silly and vary your voice and your volume, your pitch and your tone. You can mimic a baby or a favorite actor's voice and make it sound really ridiculous. And once you've done that, you can switch to the limiting belief that you're holding on to. And I guarantee you it will change your perception of those words that trigger you really deeply. So I would really love to hear if any of you do try that exercise. And at the end, if anyone is game, we can actually do an exercise together, and I can go through that with someone. So let me know if you're up for it. So what triggers imposter syndrome? Well, anything that creates a shift in our identity. So things like a new job, a big pitch, starting a big project, or even just the suggestion of it. And this is really important. So just yesterday, I actually booked my first overseas holiday since COVID, and I'm so excited. And you can actually put yourself in that moment, in that feeling moment, where you can elevate your state and get in that euphoric state of happiness just through booking a holiday, or just through feeling intensely happy about something, even if you're imagining what that might be. And actually, science proves that booking a holiday through to getting on the plane or going away on the holiday is as enjoyable and profound as actually being on the holiday. So the second you book, you've had a massive win in terms of elevating your state and your physical response, your mood and your energy. It's the same in reverse though. So we can anchor negativity to anything that we choose as well. And it can be unconscious, don't get me wrong. We don't set about sabotaging ourselves, but we have that capacity to do it. The other thing is that we can have an unconscious addiction to that chronic stress cycle, because we're so habitually geared to being in that constant stress mode that we don't know what it's like to not be stressed. And I don't know if any of you have a friend that literally cannot relax, can't sit still, never sits down to finish a cup of tea or a coffee, is always on the go. It's actually quite exhausting to be around, and we can actually become addicted to chronic stress in our body, because it causes a biochemical reaction and it becomes basically an addictive response to stimulus that we have. We can also have it when we receive criticism or feedback, even if, I'm sorry about the typo, even if that feedback is positive. So 72% of people in that research study in 2019 said that positive feedback impacted them negatively and triggered their imposter syndrome feelings. Because again, that cognitive bias, they look for ways to prove how that positive feedback actually reconfirms their idea that they're not good enough, not worthy, not deserving. Comparisonitis, so 81% of the respondents said that they're triggered by thoughts of comparing themselves with others. Life stages and events are huge as well. So promotions, new jobs, marriage, divorce, parenthood, maternity leave, menopause. Now, many of those things cause a hormonal shift in our body as well, which exacerbates things. And also alpha masculine competitiveness. So it can be within families, it can be within a relationship or in a work environment. So organizations that have leaderboards and reward performance and bonuses and dollar figures sold and things like that, they're alpha masculine competitive environments. And, you know, if you're a person who does suffer from imposter syndrome, that is not a scenario in which you're going to thrive at all. And often that will actually make someone completely shut down. And the turnover of people that go into those environments, it would be almost 100%. So I wonder if, based on any of those examples, you know what triggers imposter syndrome for you. And if you do, if you have an idea, I would jot that down, because it will help with that self-inquiry, and it will help you be able to shift that going forward as well. And any of these things actually widens the gap in the imposter syndrome gap, and it invokes our use of coping strategies. Again, fine when those coping strategies are enough to get us through, but if they fail us completely, if the situation is severe enough, then we are left completely exposed. So I don't know if you've ever heard about the mind-body link and the power of our thoughts, but I usually like to do this in a bigger group, and I've done it in an auditorium before with 300 people, and it's super fun. So if we were to say to ourselves, and if you repeat this to yourself now as well, you know, 3-4 times, you know, I'm tired and stressed. I'm tired and stressed. I'm so tired and stressed. Tired. I'm stressed. And then I asked you to get out of your chair. You would literally get up like an 80-year-old person with a crook back. There would be no energy at all. If we were to flip that and we said, I'm confident and strong, I'm confident and strong, I'm confident and strong, and then I asked you to jump up out of your chair, the energy is drastically different. And, you know, I usually ask people, you know, how do you feel? Do you feel brighter or darker? Do you feel heavier or lighter? And, you know, I can guarantee you that those positive statements make people feel brighter, happier, more confident, lighter. And it really powerfully demonstrates the link between our mind and our body. So what we tell our brain, it believes. So if we tell our brain, anything is possible, I'm open and curious, you know, I'm willing to learn a new way of being, then that's possible and available to us. And our brain will allow us to begin to create that shift. And if I ever have new clients come on board, I ask them, you know, are you ready? You know, have you had your moment? Are you ready to make this shift now? Because if they say, well, I've tried everything, and, you know, you're my last ditch effort. You know, I've tried everything else, and, you know, you know, surely you can help me create the change. My response to them is actually, you know, unfortunately, I don't think it's worthwhile us working together at the moment. And, you know, these are the things that I think you should work on, and, you know, come back to me when you're ready. Because I know that if they don't believe that they're empowered to create change in their own life, in their own mind, in their own body, then it's not going to happen for them. And what will happen is we will work together, and they will not get the transformation and the shift that they desire, and then they will blame me. So it's just impossible for us to gain positive benefit from working together if we start on the assumption that this is the last ditch effort. I've tried everything else and nothing else has worked, and you will get that shift for me. Because at the end of the day, I can't get a shift for anyone. I'm here as a guide to help you create a deeply transformational process for yourself. So we've touched before on the inner critic. So I wonder if you are aware of your inner critic, and if he or she is full of negative mind story fears that live rent-free in your head. So I wonder what your inner critic says, and whether or not it keeps you awake at night. And, you know, if you're the kind of person that wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning with worry thoughts and stress, you know, it's quite likely those negative thoughts are going around in your head. And I wonder if you ever find yourself holding back or playing small and staying safe. And if you are, you're not alone. is an automatic nervous system response that's designed to protect us. But the beautiful thing is that at any point in time, we can choose differently and we can learn the right tools and strategies to create really meaningful change in our life. So if we have a think about that mind-body link, and we think about imposter syndrome and the kind of words that are used, surveying all of my clients, I take detailed notes on the words that they use when we speak. And these are some of the words that they associate with how they're feeling when they first start working with me. So overwhelmed, no voice or no ideas, not speaking up, not coping, stressed, not valued, surviving, worry, stressed, anxiety, screwed up, surviving. So I don't know about you, but there's some heavy words and they don't make me feel great. And I know that they don't make my clients feel great. And carrying that around, it's like having a weight that's, impossible on your shoulders every single day when you wake up. So it's going to really weigh you down. So I wonder now, in hindsight, with what you know, whether you feel that imposter syndrome does or has affected you. And I wonder, knowing what you know now, how does it affect you on an emotional level? Because creating a level of awareness means that we can put a pause on that stress cycle response. So we actually have about a 1 to 4 second pause between our thought and our reaction. And if we become more aware of imposter syndrome, how it's showing up for us, we can short circuit that process and we can choose an alternate behavior and response and emotion instead. And that might feel like an impossibly small window, but actually, the more awareness that's created, the easier it becomes to make effective use of it. It's a bit like the first time you get in the car and you're, driving a stick shift and you've got to put the car in, through the gears. You're going to be really, really clunky, but you'll eventually end up with a level of mastery where you can, drive down the freeway at 110 whilst, listening to the radio, singing a song and chatting to the person next to you. So you become really good at it with enough practice. And I wonder how imposter syndrome affects you on a practical level in your career or your business life. Do you find yourself holding back? Are there things that you would like to do or achieve that you're not putting yourself out there for? For a long time, for me, it was being on stage. So my mum is actually a singer. And every time as a child, every time I opened my mouth, I had a microphone put in front of my face. And the introvert that I am, it just made me shrink back. And so speaking up, being on stage, being in the limelight, being in front of people was something that I found excessively triggering and couldn't do anything to overcome until I did all of this deep work on myself. And so my next question is, if you no longer had imposter syndrome, what would you be doing, thinking or feeling differently? And this is getting in that feeling mode, a bit like how I described, but when you book a holiday and you practice the feeling that you're going to have having this amazing holiday, if we have a view of who we wish to be without imposter syndrome and we sit in that place and think and feel like we are that person, that we believe that shift is possible for us, then we're going to direct our energy towards achieving that. So if you have ever been plagued by imposter syndrome, it's really important to help you spot the early warning signs, because it may not affect you day to day, but it can show up. So if you have a sudden change in any of the early warning signs that we spoke about, so perfectionism behavior, procrastination, paralysis, or people pleasing, they are a really good sign that we are going to default to our coping strategies, and perhaps ones that are not beneficial for us and that may leave us hanging dry when we need them the most. And again, the whole premise of this work and resolving imposter syndrome is to do away with the reliance on coping strategies so that we can achieve a level of grounded self-confidence that enables us to tackle anything that we choose with, I guess, curiosity and enthusiasm. Not everything will feel easy, but we can certainly tackle things with that enthusiasm and curiosity. And it's the difference between, you know, a challenge and a milestone. So, you know, if something is a challenge, then it's something that we can work through, we can strategize on and get through. But if it's a roadblock, then it's something that's in our way and we find difficult to overcome. Just quickly, I'd like to debunk the most common myths on imposter syndrome. And this is really important because if we don't release those, we're not releasing the limiting beliefs that comes with them, and therefore our brain will not allow us to make that shift. So number one is it's incurable. I'm here to tell you it's absolutely possible to clear imposter syndrome. But as I've mentioned before, the unconscious mind won't let us fix something we don't believe is possible. So if we don't believe imposter syndrome is curable, then that's our reality. So it's critical that we let that thought go in order to move forward. Number two, I don't have time to deal with it. Well, I think it's critical to make time for what's important to you, to make a choice to let imposter syndrome go and to prioritize doing that above all else. And it is possible to rewire our brain and body in under 10 minutes a day. And I reckon if we surveyed everyone, there are certainly ways that everyone can find 10 minutes a day in their day in order to create the shift they desire. It's just a matter of whether or not it's important enough to focus your energy and attention towards. Myth number three, I need it to perform. And I hear this all the time. And I used to hear this when I was coaching people in a corporate environment as well. You know, I worry if I'm not stressed, I won't be motivated enough to perform. I'll turn into a couch potato. I can choose to stop using, but you can choose to stop using those fear-based thoughts to trigger your adrenal and cortisol responses to survive imposter syndrome. And, you know, I used to manage big sales teams, and talking about that alpha competitive environment, that's exactly what, you know, I worked in on a regular basis. And, you know, if we rely on that adrenal and cortisol response to survive and work in an environment that we're not geared towards, we're going to end up burnt out. And I saw that on a regular basis. So we can retrain our mind and our body to tap into the power of our sympathetic nervous system using eustress. So eustress is the exact opposite of stress. It's where we create positive excitement in order to perform. So we get enthusiastic, we get excited, and, you know, we use that to prompt our work performance to actually achieve the results that we desire, instead of going into flight, fight, and freeze mode and shutting down. Now, that model of eustress was actually coined by Hans Selye. And if you've never heard of that eustress model before, it's a really interesting read and may help you understand, you know, I won't go into it in more detail today, but help you understand the difference between stress and eustress so that you can focus your energy flipping between, you know, a negative stress model to a positive one. Number four, it's inevitable. It's just a part of life. Well, when our sense of identity shifts, we can clear out all the causes of imposter syndrome and the coping strategies that we rely on, and we can grow into a more empowered and resourceful self. So it's not inevitable at all, unless we choose not to deal with it. I need it to be likable. And we touched on this earlier. You know, I worry without imposter syndrome, I'll be arrogant and people won't like me. But without imposter syndrome, we actually become more grounded, confident, and courageous. We become more productive and more competent. We have so much more energy, and we are, in actual fact, more likable and easygoing and inspiring to be around. So in actual fact, ditching imposter syndrome makes us more likable and not less likable. So why it's important to let imposter syndrome go? because those myths hold us back. They keep us stuck and they weigh us down. They prevent us from clearing out imposter syndrome. And we need all the right tools and awareness to create that really important shift in our reality. Because awareness is the key to conscious choice. With it, we can choose our thoughts, we can choose our feeling, we can choose our reactions, and we can choose our actions. And most importantly, we need to do that because the brain won't let us believe something, achieve something that it doesn't believe is possible. So I invite you to do a quick, a couple of spelling errors in here, I do apologise, a couple of, a bit of self-inquiry for you to do offline. I wonder if you could think of these prompts. I can't, imposter syndrome, because anything that comes to mind. You know, I can't ditch imposter syndrome because, you know, I need it to perform. Whatever those feelings or thoughts or beliefs are for you, it's really important to air them out, to say them out loud and to claim them, because without them, without doing so, they form in our unconscious mind, they create that roadblock and we aren't able to move forward in a way that we want to. So the biggest mistake that people make is that they hope imposter syndrome will just go away. So some might go ahead and build some better coping strategies temporarily and reinforce them and perfect them a little bit more. The trouble is, as soon as that identity gap widens, that bridge of coping strategies falls short and it will leave us stranded. And this was me. I left a career and numerous jobs I loved because I was plagued with fear, doubt, and stress. And I was terrified I was going to get caught out. So I came, I achieved, and I left before someone discovered that I was no good, which was crazy because it stopped me from excelling in the business, from progressing in my career, and I made sideward shifts instead of upward shifts. And I also ended up experiencing burnout. So, you know, I worked for a Big Four consulting company. I was a CRM database manager. I had a big team of people underneath me and analysts underneath me. And, you know, I stressed myself so constantly that I ended up with migraines for 6 weeks straight. So I was either had or getting over a migraine for 6 weeks straight. And on top of that, I was, you know, traveling all over the countryside. I was constantly on planes. I was catching red eyes. I wasn't sleeping. I didn't know how to rest. I didn't know how to prioritize self-care. And I ended up in hospital for, you know, a week to shortcut the migraines with a whole cocktail of nasty drugs. And I spent 3 months on my bed and my couch getting over it, which I don't recommend to anyone. And this is why the subject of imposter syndrome is so important to me. And, you know, the reason I've devoted 10 years or more of my life to understanding it, unpacking it and resolving it, and helping other people do the same, because no one should have to go through what I put myself through. And it's absolutely not necessary, because it's exhausting, it's unfulfilling, and certainly I was miserable. It impacted my relationship. My husband was always, you know, criticizing me for working too hard, putting in too much effort. I was always tired and stressed and switched on, and I didn't know how to rest and relax other than being on holiday. And often getting on a plane and going on holiday was the only time I had off, but I would crash first, sleep the whole time and come back and then start again. So I didn't know how to shortcut that response. So we're nearly finished. We might go a couple of moments over, so I do apologise. So the problem with coping strategies is, as that identity gap widens and our old coping strategies just aren't enough, and that can happen without warning. So that unknown moment our identity is challenged, we automatically revert directly to all of our, directly all of our time and energy into coping and just surviving instead of thriving. And changing our world isn't so much about what we do, it's about who we allow ourselves to become. I'd like to ask you, who will you allow yourself to become without imposter syndrome? What will that look like and feel like for you if you suffer from it? So what's the answer? Well, it's not perfecting those coping strategies. It's about clearing the fear and doing it anyway. It's about closing that imposter syndrome gap. It's about becoming your authentic, courageous, and empowered self so that you can get on with being you and doing what you do, having released all the drama and fear and pain, and allowing everything that you want to do, the challenges that you face, to feel good, exciting, and satisfying, and tapping into that eustress instead of coping with stress and pushing on through. So I'd like to encourage you to start with a quick win. So I'd like to invite you to do a quick exercise with me to press pause on imposter syndrome now. So even if you don't feel like you have suffered from imposter syndrome yourself, then give this a go, because even in moments of stress, this exercise will help you. So I invite you to choose something that on a scale of 1 to 10 is about a 4 or 5 in terms of severeness for you. So 10 being really severe, 1 being not severe at all. So just that 4 or 5 mark of causing you stress or triggers your imposter syndrome. And I'd like to invite you to spend a moment telling yourself the stories you tell yourself about that. And notice how your body feels. What's the tone of that message that you're telling yourself? What are the type of the thoughts that you're thinking? And how does it feel in your body? And if it feels comfortable for you, I invite you to softly close your eyes. Or if you want to keep them open, that's fine too. Just gently let the focus of your eyes just gently relax. And placing your hands over your diaphragm, just below the rib cage and above the belly button. Taking 3 deep sighing breaths in through the nose. Noisy breaths out through the mouth with sigh. And again, at your own pace. One more time, and you might notice yourself sinking further down into the chair, your shoulders relaxing, your jaw relaxing. And just for a few moments, allow full awareness to rest on the physical sensation as you breathe in and out. If you find your mind wanders, that's fine. Just gently guide your focus back to your breath and the feeling of your tummy moving in and out. And just allow your body to soften as you prepare to release this practice. Before you do, I invite you to allow the corner of your mouth to lift up just slightly, even a smile if you wish. And opening your eyes if they're closed, and maybe stretch and yawn if that feels good to you. I'm interested to know, how do you feel? Do you feel up to popping that in the chat? So if you don't feel like you've suffered from imposter syndrome yourself, given what you've learned tonight, you can still use this technique to help a friend or a colleague or a loved one to get grounded and calm their nervous system. If you've ever felt a moment of anxiety, it will work the same way. You feel nice and relaxed, Sui, and deeper. Great. That is the aim. So that exercise actually resets the nervous system. So it's like taking your brain and your body back through neutral, because you can't go from, first gear to 4th gear, right? You have to go back through neutral. And that's what you're doing, calming the nervous system and going back through neutral. And from there, we allow, the brain to activate that prefrontal cortex again and to think logically, calmly, and creatively. And that's when our best self can come forward. Now, I'm keen to understand any observations or feedback that you have. So feel free to share. And I know Sui and Deepa, you've shared. one thing I'd just like to quickly mention is that there is a danger of toxic positivity. And this comes back to things like, affirmations, people repeatedly telling themselves, I am amazing, but they don't believe that they're amazing, right? So if we tell our brain a whole bunch of stories that it doesn't believe, it will not adopt them. So toxic resilience is about, bouncing back, pushing on through, pretending, coping, and surviving. So that is imposter syndrome survival mode 101. Genuine positivity is not getting knocked for a six when something comes our way. It's flowing and not fighting. It's being real. It's working with ease and grace, and it's thriving in our life. So it's possible to feel, massive compassion for the world around us, but still be struggling in ourselves. And it's okay to feel however it is we feel. We don't have to blindly tell ourselves, I must be positive, because that's not being real and it's not being authentic. And it's not really doing anyone any favors or getting us any wins. So that breathing exercise will help you to connect with that genuine positivity. Andy, thanks for sharing. So feeling relaxed after that. Ordering those thoughts a bit, definitely motivated to work on imposter syndrome. I'm glad to know it's able to be worked on. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. It's absolutely possible. I'm a personal testament to the fact, and have had so many clients, create a really positive, profound shift in their life. And I was chatting to a couple of people today, they're on this call, and I was saying that, often we get to the point where they say, oh, I get it now. Like, why didn't you just say so? But the thing is, I can't create a shift for you. It has to come in your own experience, in your own time, in your own way, in order for that profound shift to occur. So no amount of words or cognitive thinking or strategizing will actually help you create a profound shift. It's a feeling exercise. And it is, I often teach, multiple ways to achieve a similar outcome to help resolve imposter syndrome, because what works for one may not work for another. What hits home for one may not hit home for another. And we're all on our own journey. We all interpret this world differently and our experiences differently. And it's about finding different ways at different times to hit home and really help you create that shift. But this is how my clients feel after they've let imposter syndrome go. So on a poll that I took late last year from all of the clients I saw last year, and you'll notice the significant shift in the language: achievement, fulfilled, drive, amazing, freedom, proud, awesome, self-confident, fulfilled. How does that make you feel, that shift in the language? It certainly makes me feel inspired. It makes me feel lighter. It makes me feel happier. And we know that brain-body link is so profound. So getting up every day, feeling like and thinking like this is going to create a massive shift in who you are and how you show up. So my question is, are you ready to be authentically all of you? Are you truly worthy? Are you sure of what you deserve? And how much more could you be contributing to what you compared to what you already are in terms of how you show up? If you're plagued with imposter syndrome and you're holding back, then you're not shining in a way that this world needs you to. So where to from here? So I invite you to share your biggest light bulb moment from today's presentation. And I wonder if you have decided how you want to feel going forward. And if you've had your basta moment yet. Remember that beautiful Italian word that said with great gusto, basta, enough, that's it, I'm done. I had that basta moment. It should have been after I was in hospital with my migraines, but it wasn't. It's when I went back into another corporate role and went straight back after a break of running my own business, straight back into those old habits where I recognized them acutely. And then I had my basta moment. And you know what? I think it took motherhood to get me to that basta moment, because I simply didn't have the time and energy left in reserves to direct my energy to being for want of a better word, dysfunctional in the way that I approached my work anymore. I just wasn't available to it anymore, and I had to make the change. So if you're ready to make that change, then you're making a commitment, you're telling your brain that you're ready and available to create change, and that is available to you, and therefore that change will flow. So I ask you, what actions will you take today to integrate your learning? Will you practice the breathing exercise? Will you do some self-inquiry about your limiting beliefs? Will you practice watching your negative thoughts float on by? Will you play that desensitization game with someone? So what will you do within the next 24 hours to embed your learning? Really, at the end of the day, the where to from here, it's completely up to you. But when we implement what we've learned, we are much more likely to embed our learning and to get benefit from it. So if you feel excited to, feel free to answer any questions, share any feedback or shifts that you've had, and you're very welcome to also go into the Whole She Collective and share that information in there as well. So sorry, Tegan, you shared, it was great, thank you. I had a few things in childhood that I remember that I had possibly been a trigger for imposter syndrome. Being told things at a young age definitely sticks with you. Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. So another exercise you might like to do is what do I think or believe instead? So if you wanted to write a list of all of your limiting beliefs on one side and create that shift for yourself so that you're creating that map for your brain where I was and where I choose to be instead. That really does open up possibilities for you as well. Great. So does anyone have any other questions at all? I know we've run a little bit over time, so I do apologise, and I know it's getting late. If no one has any other questions, I will let you go and enjoy your evening. Thanks for your time. I hope you found it valuable. Good night.
Night, and thanks, Narelle.
Thanks, Narelle.
Thank you very much. See you later.